right, we are being recorded notice, so it must be official now. Good morning, everyone. All right, everyone. Well, good morning. It looks like a number of you have joined already, and I want to thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Hart Nelson. I'm the chairman for Citizens for Modern Transit. And on behalf of CMT, I'd like to welcome all of you to our quarterly Talking Transit event. This one is looking forward to the future of transit in the St. Louis region. Before we get started, we at CMT want to let you know that we're deeply saddened to hear of the senseless crime on Sunday. It resulted in the tragic death of a Metro Transit contracted security officer. Our condolences go out to Security Officer James Cook's family and friends, as well as our partners at Bi-State and Metro Transit. I'd appreciate it if you could join me in a moment of silence to honor James. Thank you. Want to thank all of the CMT board members who have joined us this morning. And I'd also like to thank CMT's Platinum and Gold sponsors, including AARP of St. Louis, Bi-State Development, Emerson, BJC Healthcare, Missouri and Kansas Laborers District Council, ULICO, and Washington University in St. Louis. We'd not be able to provide these sorts of updates without their support, so thank you very much. Today, we're going to discuss the expansion of Metrolink in Illinois, and a new study just about to begin on the North Side-South Side corridor. We'll also explain the current shift in focus to community mobility hubs and provide insight into the funding for transit. And when I lived in DC, and a number of you have heard me say this before, one of the things that I thought was most useful was seeing the DC Metro map and seeing all of the planned expansion routes. Some of them were years away. You'd see the dotted lines, not solid lines, but it always gave you some sense of where the system was going and what you'd be able to do. And so I'm looking forward to hearing that today. Our panelists today will include Patrick Judge, Managing Director at Gonzalez Companies, Jim Wild, Executive Director for East-West Gateway Council of Governments, Jessica Gershman, Assistant Executive Director, Planning and System Development at St. Louis Metro Transit at Bi-State Development, and Scott Ogilvie, Transportation Policy Planner, Planning and Urban Design Agency. We'd also like to welcome Kevin Scott, General Manager of Field Security at Metro Transit, who'll be available to answer any security questions during the Q&A. And now I'd like to turn to our friend, the Executive Director of CMT, Kim Sella, to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Hart, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. We are really excited to have this conversation, this dialogue, and this public forum today, especially on Rosa Parks Transit Equity Day. Transit is inherently an equity issue, and the region has a lot to look forward to on the public transportation front. We're excited to hear what is all in the works. Public transit is an essential component of the transportation system in the St. Louis region. So let's get started by taking a moment to hear from each of our panelists on the projects that they're working on. Then we will hear from Jim about the future of funding for transit, which is a key component to this entire conversation. Please leave any questions that you may have in the chat box, and we will get to as many as possible today. So to get started, we're going to be talking about light rail expansion in Illinois, and I'm going to invite Patrick Judge to start.
Great, thank you, Kim. I appreciate it. Again, Pat Judge here with Gonzalez Companies. Our firm is very fortunate to be a part of this project. It's a 5.5 mile light rail system from Scott Air Force Base at the terminus of Shiloh Scott Station around to Mid-America Airport, essentially. As far as the map, Mallory, do we have the map up? All right, fantastic, thank you. So when you take a look at the map of the overall system, well, this is the map of line section 4B, which we're actually going to talk about today. So when you take a look at this map here, essentially what you'll see is the red line that you look at here on the map is the original planned Metrolink extension out to Scott Air Force Base. Okay, so back in the early 2000s, we actually constructed and finished the Metrolink extension out to the Shiloh Scott Metrolink station as it exists today. Due to funding shortfalls, we were not able to construct this next section here that we're going to talk about. Fortunately, the state of Illinois has granted St. Clair County and the Transit District a $96 million grant to complete the extension from the Shiloh Scott station as it exists today around to Mid-America Airport. So when you take a look at this map in particular, the red line is what was planned in 2000 and 2001. The yellow line, it may be a little difficult to see here, but the yellow line is the current alignment for this next extension. And the reason we deviated from the previous alignment was to actually promote growth and economic development in this particular area. And that's a big part of this project. In general, as probably many of you know, Boeing has invested significantly in and around Mid-America Airport. There are other developments in this particular area as well. So constructing the Metrolink right through the property as previously designed just didn't make a lot of sense. So we actually modified the alignment to follow the yellow alignment that you can see here on your screen. Again, it's about 5.5 miles of light rail extension. It's double track about half of the way from Shiloh Scott up to Reeder Road. And if you take a look at, maybe a challenge here to see, but approximately halfway through the exhibit here at the top, you'll see the Reeder Road interchange. And that's important to talk about briefly. So within the last decade, the county and the state of Illinois constructed the Reeder Road interchange. Now, prior to this interchange being in place and prior to this particular project, in order to access Mid-America Airport, one would have to travel along Interstate 64 over to the east to State Route 4, okay, on the right side of your screen, get off the interchange and come around and get into the airport and access the airport that way. Now, as part of this Metrolink extension, in addition to the rail, we're going to actually construct an access roadway, which is essentially an outer road, which will connect Reeder Road and the airport itself. And so the access roadway is actually in green here. If you take a look at Reeder Road, where we drop off of Interstate 64 in the middle, top middle of the screen, we are going to actually construct and connect Reeder Road with the green line there around to the airport. And that's important for the development of the airport and access to the airport in and of itself. So that's also part of this overall project. Additionally, if funding is available, we are going to include a bike trail as part of this project. So if you've been in St. Clair County, you know that there's a bike trail that runs throughout the system along the alignment in various locations. So if funding is available, we are also going to include the bike trail alignment along with the roadway and with Metrolink itself. As it stands today, just a quick project status update. The project is currently at the 10% design stage. Design should be completed by August of 2022. We are going to bid out construction in 8 different bid packages rather than 1 or 2 large packages. And the purpose for that is simply to make sure that we allow the opportunity for local contractors to be able to bid on this project and be able to participate in this project. So there will be 8 separate bid packages for this 5.5 mile line extension. Another item that I'd like to talk about briefly that we're really excited about, Gonzalez Companies has partnered with the transit district with a mentoring program. And so we're actually going to use this project as a way to introduce high school and early age college students, underprivileged minority college students in particular. We're going to provide this project to them in a way that they can actually see all the various elements that go into a project like this, from engineering to construction to planning, the legal aspects. So throughout the project, we anticipate over 50 children and kids participating in that program. So we're really excited about that. As far as construction of this project, it could be begin as early as this fall of October in November of 21. More than likely, it will probably be spring of 22 before we start construction. Construction should be wrapped up, barring any delays, in late October of 24, with revenue service beginning in December of 24. So that's the project in a nutshell. Be happy to answer any questions at a later point in the presentation.
Thank you, Pat, very much. We've already had comments in the chat box about how people are excited to see that the Metro Bike Link program is included as a part of this project. And we can get to this question later, so be thinking about this. How do we ensure funding is available for the extension of that bike trail as we go? So our next up is Scott Ogilvie, and Scott will be talking about the North Side, South Side study, the next iteration of that study. So Scott, I am going to turn it over to you this morning.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Can you see my slide up? Great. So I'm Scott Ogilvie. I work in the Planning and Urban Design Agency for the City of St. Louis. And I'm going to talk about our next phase of analysis for the North Side, South Side Transit Corridor. So some quick bullets on what it is. We are about to embark on a technological alternative analysis within the North Side, South Side Transit Corridor within the City of St. Louis. We are just about to get started on this project. We have selected a consultant and we are negotiating a contract with them. We recently have approval of a memorandum of understanding from Bi-State to jointly manage this project. So we've got the city and the transit agency helping to manage the consultant and making sure we've got all perspectives at the table. And the funding source for this $1.5 million assessment is the first expenditure from, excuse me, from the economic development sales tax that was authorized in 2017, 60% of which is accumulating funding to construct transit expansion in this North Side, South Side corridor. I think to explain where we're going now, we have to go back and look at prior assessments of this corridor. So I'm going to show some documents that folks probably remember from prior assessments. The first detailed assessment of this corridor, which really established the vision for street running light rail, was completed in 2008. And this assessment covered a long corridor from Florissant Valley Community College in the north all the way to Bayless Road in St. Louis County at the south end of the alignment. And this was really a long range corridor planning document. A key development since then was in 2017 when the city of St. Louis placed the economic development sales tax authorization on the ballot, which voters approved, which allowed us to start accumulating funding specifically for this project corridor. In 2018, a very thorough analysis was done to establish a minimum operable segment for this project. And that minimum operable segment is Grand and Natural Bridge on the north end of the project to Jefferson and Chippewa on the south end. That's an 8.3 mile street running light rail segment. And this 2018 study included a lot of detailed information about ridership estimates, cost estimates for the project, and an FTA New Start's funding eligibility assessment. So I'm going to mention some of the details in this 2018 study that lead us to where we're going with this new alternatives analysis. So the 2018 study established a cost for this 8.3 mile segment, which was close to $1 billion, which is quite frankly a little higher than we were hoping when we had this on the ballot in 2017. And it did a thorough assessment to determine how eligible or competitive it would be for New Start's funding, which is the primary federal program for transit expansion, for capital costs for transit expansion. And if you'll notice here, this 14 to 16 score is crucial because if you're below 15, your project is not even eligible for funding. So we are right on the threshold, and that is primarily driven by this number here, cost effectiveness. And that's really a cost effectiveness per rider metric. And so because ridership in this corridor is not particularly high, or it's not projected to be particularly high, we score in the lowest category for cost effectiveness for the project. Another key component is, or was, an assessment of how we could pay for the project. So the 2018 study went through a number of scenarios for how we might fund the total construction cost, and they selected the most favorable scenarios. And here we have 941 and 947 million for the capital cost to construct it. And even in sort of the most optimistic scenario where we would receive 50% of the funding from FTA to construct the project, there's still a capital funding gap of between 150 and $210 million. And I think a realistic assessment is that this project is unlikely to get a full 50% funding share from the FTA based on the way they've been funding other light rail projects. So in reality, this capital gap to construct street running light rail in this corridor is probably north of this $210 million figure. We can kind of skip past this slide. Well, maybe we'll go through it. So we have, where are we today? We've got a project that we're very excited about. It's a desirable transit corridor. I think everybody is excited about light rail, but the reality is constructing light rail can be costly, and this project is on the margin for federal funding. And in the last decade, the viability and familiarity of the public with other high capacity public transit modes, such as bus rapid transit, has really expanded. And there have been lots of bus rapid transit projects in the United States that have been coming online in recent years. And this new analysis we're doing, the alternatives analysis, a key component of it is going to be an assessment of both our financial capacity to construct the project and to operate the project over 20 years, which is a key component of an FTA New Starts or Small Starts application. So what scope of work does this alternatives analysis cover? The first thing, which I think is critically important, is it's going to assess how to close those funding gaps to build and operate the project as it is currently conceived. So what are some potential strategies we could use to fill that $210 million capital gap and the operational gap that we know exists to operate the project? So that's phase one of the project. Then we're going to move to public engagement on alternatives. The project is going to screen all available alternatives that could provide high frequency, high capacity, high amenity public transit within this corridor. It's going to move to conceptual design of what we view as viable alternatives to the current street running light rail framework. And then it's going to make an apples to apples comparison of all viable alternatives, including capacity to carry people, amenities of the project, construction timeline, funding eligibility from the FTA, desirability, all those things, so that at the end of the process, we really have the full picture we need to decide which direction to take this project. I think, at the City of St. Louis, what we feel is an imperative to move this project forward. North Side, South Side funding was approved by voters. We think we have a mandate and there's an imperative to build this project to improve public transit access and to reduce racial and economic disparities within the City of St. Louis. But the reality is this is a very difficult project to build, especially a project that the city is the lead on. And I think it's great to have this side by side with the Illinois project, because perhaps at the end we can talk about some of the real differences in how transit is funded on the Missouri side versus how transit is funded on the Illinois side, where they have tremendous support from the state in Illinois. Really kudos to them. We're all very envious, and we have extremely limited funding support from the state on the Missouri side. So some of the alternatives that are going to be assessed are a very high level gold standard bus rapid transit. So the characteristics of gold standard bus rapid transit are dedicated right-of-way through all or almost all of the corridor, which means these buses would not be mixing with other traffic. They've got their own running way or transit way. They've got stations that are comparable to light rail stations. They've got off-board fare payment, so you're not paying the driver as you enter the vehicle. They've got level boarding, so it's easy to get on and off the vehicle, and they're fully accessible without deploying a lift for all riders. They've got signal priority at intersections, which means they're not stopping at every red light. And they have frequent service, which is a key component to offer an amenity to riders where they know that a vehicle will pick them up quickly and they don't have to always be referring to a schedule before they think about using the transit service. We're also going to screen other transit options. There is growing capacity to do battery powered light rail that does not rely on an overhead catenary system. Although these vehicles can be quite expensive, and it's not clear that this would reduce the overall cost of the project. And there are some emerging technologies like trackless trams, which currently do not exist in the United States, but I think are worth doing a little exploration of, so that we know that we've covered all our bases in emerging technology for this project. That is my presentation, and happy to entertain more questions at the end. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Scott, for that update on the North Side, South Side study. Scott, when do you anticipate that getting underway? Did I miss that?
This spring, yeah, it's coming up this spring. So BPS is in negotiations with the consultant just to finalize the contract and get things going. So okay, we were hopeful to have this running in 2020, but it experienced some COVID budget related delays, unfortunately. But it is moving forward, and we should be working within the next few months on the project.
Okay, great. So I'm seeing your questions in the questions. We will save those to the end because we want to give as much time as possible to Q&A. So I'd like to invite Jessica Gershman, who is next up, to talk a little bit about the new plan to look at community mobility hubs around certain bus lines and certain intersections. So Jessica, I'm going to turn it over.
Excellent. Good morning. Thanks. Let's see. I'll share my screen here and get going. Yeah. So from the scale of these large, very large capital projects, can everyone see this? This map of the service area, great. To, going from these large and long range expansion projects to sort of a different scale where we are looking at the existing bus network and how we can support it with strategic capital investments. That's kind of what I'd like to share this morning. So it is really neat to see these projects matched up and how they're all kind of collectively promoting the future of transit. So again, you know, we have been working in earnest at making improvements to our existing network for our customers. And this community mobility hubs project is something that we've been talking about now. Some of you in the CMT audience will have remembered this from a couple of years ago even, but we have since secured some federal competitive grant funding and, you know, have more resources to kind of put to bear to make this a reality. So just a quick overview again of our network. This is a 600 approximately square mile service area in 3 counties. And we you know, have a lot of ground to cover, a lot of bus routes on both sides of the river. And you'll see across the top are, you know, examples of newest examples of different vehicles in our fleet. That it's really wonderful to start seeing the uniformity of some of our rebranding. Second in from the right on my screen at least is our newest 60-foot battery electric articulated buses that are currently being tested and will be out on the number 70 Grand Line later this spring, hopefully. So these are large capital investments, right? Our vehicles. And then, you know, along the side, you'll see examples of some of our more recent large capital investments in the network: North County Transit Center in Ferguson, Missouri, Civic Center in downtown St. Louis, and the bottom picture, CMT was integral to making the Cortex Metrolink infill station happen. So these are huge, massive projects that have been happening and are very important and critical to allowing our passengers to transfer and travel safely across the system. Again, the scale that I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about is more at the street level. Again, a little context sharing. This is a declining ridership trend that we've been seeing at the national level for over 5 years. In the St. Louis region, our last sort of ridership peak was fiscal year 14. As recently as fiscal year 19, we had, over 36 million total annual boardings. And that purple line that you see down at the bottom is so far fiscal year 21 to date. So the picture I'd like to share here is that this trend has been happening. There's a lot of exogenous factors that contribute to ridership decline. We were already working toward focusing on the resiliency of our transit system. And if this pandemic has showed us anything, it's that, we've got such dedicated professionals on our team in the Metro Bi-State shop, and also that we've retained and held steady at about 50% of our pre-COVID ridership the entire time. So these last 10, going on 11 months, and so it's essential, as Kim said at the very top, this is a critical way of allowing folks to connect to jobs and opportunities and lifestyle trips and healthcare trips that they need to get to. And so we need to keep on the path that we've been setting despite the pandemic kind of setting us back a little bit. So to that end, we will continue to support our reimagining of the transit network. We redid the bus network and implemented the Missouri side bus network in 2019. And the concept here is to, match service to the market demand. And so, we focused on equity and staying within our financial capacity. But, there's a lot of principles out there in transit planning and frequency and direct networks that can encourage more spontaneous travel and use of the system is shown to increase ridership. So this is a facet of that plan, investing in 10 routes that carried about 50% of our riders, our annual boardings. So these purple routes highlighted here show you that we're carrying a lot of people on a small, relatively small part of our network. And so investing strategically in capital to help connect these routes when people are transferring maybe outside of a transit center is an important investment as well. A result of the bus network redesign plan, and this is just kind of giving you a sense of how we began to think about the locations for the community mobility hubs. You know, we worked with a consultant and they helped us identify those major transfer points where folks are going between high frequency 15-minute service lines. So, you know, focusing on those to incorporate more amenities is kind of the direction we're headed. I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of step back and, you know, talk about that built environment. Placemaking is a concept that CMT has been focusing on for many years. A lot of you probably have participated in, I think, the 2016 walk audits of Metrolink stations. And, you know, it's a people-centered way of planning how to use your public space, right? And so the infrastructure should support how people want to move around and connect in a multimodal fashion, and enhance the accessibility of our transit network. And so this is the kind of, these are the principles and the partnerships that we're trying to, again, infuse throughout the bus network. So the community mobility hubs concept, you know, has been just that. And then in about a year ago, we received money from the Bus and Bus Facilities FTA competitive grant program that will enable us to begin planning some of these sites. We're probably going to do about half a dozen to start in the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County. So it was the Missouri side for this first round. And again, we looked at that network and looked at where the major transfer points are, where we see hundreds of people each day going from high frequency line to another. And each hub location will have kind of like a basic package of amenities, you know, improved shelter, seating, lighting, universal access. But then, of course, it's important to tailor each location to, you know, the historical and local context of a neighborhood, or maybe there's an emphasis of a local community or leader on green infrastructure investment. And so, you know, those things will get to be tailored and reflected in the hub locations. We did lose some time in 2020 with getting started, but we have a wonderful new long-range planner on our team named Brian Rogers, and he's going to be at the helm of pushing this forward. So it'll help to support all of the investment in the service that we've been making. Just lastly, I'll end here with a kind of where we are going next. So we've done that preliminary analysis of some sites. We have, you know, we looked at over a dozen and we're narrowing them down based on ridership and based on sort of the ADA accessibility needs of the site. We're now in a assessment phase for environmental and land use conditions, and that'll help narrow down like what's most feasible in terms of, you know, which corner of each intersection, where is there space for an investment like this? So, you know, these are smaller than transit centers, but they're bigger than a bus stop. So it takes a lot of coordination with the local partners who are the landowners of these areas, because, you know, Metro uses the right of way, but we often don't own it. And so then, of course, community engagement with the local residents and with local officials in those neighborhoods is another key component of this project. And so we are, you know, early in the analysis, but going forward full steam. And we hope that it will support all the other improvements and capital work that Metro has been bringing to the region.
Thank you, Jessica. We are really excited to see this. The transformation that we saw in Maplewood with the community partners around that bus stop, and that was land that was owned by a private business, and they were willing to work with us. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity, especially in the Show Me State. When you do a couple of these, you might entice others to get involved, because I think that this is a really exciting time for transit riders in these community mobility hubs. So I think that's a great development. So now we're going to turn it over to Jim Wild, the Executive Director of East West Gateway Council of Governments. And Jim is going to be talking about one of the most important things to this conversation that we're having this morning. What does funding look like at the federal, state, and local level? How will this impact any projects moving forward? So Jim, welcome to the party this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. So it's it's probably one of the most important pieces and the one we know the least about right now in terms of availability of funding and how we can make this happen or make these things happen. So, when we're looking at any of these projects, you really have four groups of funding that you can come up with, right? Private funding, and we don't have a great record of private investment in some of these things. Federal funding, and really since we've changed administrations and moved over, it looks like we're going to be moving in an upward direction on that. Everything I've heard is good, but things are happening already in terms of like the build program that was released earlier this year has been pulled back. And build is a discretionary funding program. It was tied with Tiger funds years ago when Congress did away with earmarks and discretionary funding through that process. The Obama administration brought in funding programs that could be selected by the administration. So years ago, it was Tiger funding, back in 2008, 2009, I guess it was. And then it moved into build. And so in 2020, the build program was about $1 billion. Maximum amount of money you could request at that time was 25 million. With the change of administration earlier this year, that they pulled the NOFA off the table for the build program that was released by President Trump and his administration, and they're retooling that right now. So hopefully something will be coming out on that soon. There's also been some discussion about bringing back earmarks. I'm not sure how serious that is. I would like to think at some level it would be good. We've always done fairly well through the earmark programs in the past. But then there's also programs like what Scott had referred to, new starts, small starts, those types of things. Very competitive programs. Although 80-20, 80% federal, 20% local, it was closer to 50-50 and even lower than that in some cases. So it's tough. State funding, in the Illinois portion of the region, we do really well on transit funding from the state. On the Missouri portion of the region, the state has not seen the benefit or has not become enlightened enough to put funding into transit, unfortunately, and we remain at a really low rate. I think, what is it, Kim? Statewide, maybe 4 million. I think St. Louis region gets about 700,000 or something like that.
Oh, no, that's way too high. It's
Okay.
1.7 million for
Yeah.
34 transit providers. And I think by state, Jessica, you can correct me, it's about 400 to 500,000 annually on a $300 million plus budget.
Yeah. Last week at our, I know it's low. Last week at our certification review, they were talking about 700,000. So there might be some drawdowns on that too. MoDOT are great partners in the process, but they've got their own funding obligations to try to keep roads up and going. But wherever possible, they do try to work with transit providers, transit operators on obviously the rolling stock piece of things for smaller agencies, but on trying to incorporate roadway improvements, transit improvements into roadway projects that they may be doing. So, there's always opportunities there, but in light of, COVID this last year, MoDOT didn't even have didn't add any new projects to the transportation improvement program, the statewide program. State of Illinois just released their STIP, their state transportation improvement program, and is just now going through the process of getting that amendment wrapped up. So, in the wake of COVID, things are even a little tougher on this. I know you like to hear good news in the morning, so that's why I'm sharing all this good news with you. But I think, if we worked hard, we could certainly try to encourage our legislators in the states and certainly MoDOT to try to help on funding transit a little better. And then, of course, local. Local is probably the one area that is just as tough to get funding out of. The city has did a lot in terms of passing that tax a few years ago, that economic development tax, where they were funding the North Side South Side project that they're talking about. Of course, the cross county extension was funded almost entirely out of local funds. So it's doable, but as a region, we want to do it. I'm glad and a little sad that the city is talking about this north side, south side piece of Metrolink as being a city project and trying to figure out how to fund it through the city. But we really are a region, and we should think a little more broadly about how we could bring funding in from across the whole region to fund this very important piece of light rail that serves the core of the region. On the north side of that project, it goes right into St. Louis County. There were efforts to coordinate the planning of that 2017-2018 update of locally preferred alternative that we did. Unfortunately, there were some road bumps, political road bumps that had occurred. And eventually that leader is no longer in St. Louis County, but we should be making consideration for how activities in the city tie into the county or tie in across the river. So it's great to see the commitment and the desire to move ahead on this from the city, but we need to think a little more broadly as a region about how we can be making these improvements and coming up with funding to help do these things. Again, it's we're kind of in a holding pattern until the new administration gets their feet on the ground and works a little bit hard or a little bit more on coming up with some funding. The previous administration, was transportation, healthcare, and I don't remember what his third effort was, and we never got into transportation after 4 years. In fact, we're operating off a continuing resolution for probably the last 10 years now. So it's time to start getting some funding identified, get a real bill and law in place so that we can start moving ahead. I know the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations is working hard with USDOT and the House and the Senate. We meet pretty regularly on that with individuals from all three of those entities. So, we'll see. I don't know, probably in the first 3 to 6 months of the administration, we'll probably have a better idea of where we are funding wise. So I know it's not news everybody wanted to hear, but it's kind of what we've heard the last 4 years too, right? It's just sit tight and wait and see what's going on. So, as we hear more, we'll be more than happy to try to share that info.
Thank you, Jim, for that funding update and that critical piece to this important conversation that we're having this morning. So now we have a lot of questions in our question and answer. We also have some comments in the chat box. I know we had a little internet issue. Thus happens a lot with Zoom, so I apologize. I even drove downtown to have better internet. So we'll see where we go from here. But some of the initial questions were directed at Pat Judge and the Illinois expansion. So there were questions about funding for that Metro bike link, and there's questions about the location of the station, Pat, and one other. So I'm gonna turn it over to you to answer those initial questions, and then I'm gonna jump in with some of these other questions that we've received for our other panelists.
Sure, thanks, Kim. Okay, so regarding Matt Holly had a question regarding the bid advertisement for the bid package. Matt's with Millstone Weber, I know. And so we have to follow state of Illinois guidelines for bidding, right? And so we'll go through that process. We will also advertise, obviously, on SIBA. We hope to get an initial clearing and grubbing type of contract out this fall. However, for environmental reasons, we may have to wait until next spring to do that. Okay, so stay tuned on that, but we'll make sure there's plenty of information out there. We'll have an outreach session as well, just to make sure contractors are aware of what's going on and what's ahead. Regarding a couple other questions, Brian Dulski, I believe, and Gene Ponzi regarding the bike trail. I can tell personally, I'm an avid cyclist myself, so I'm all about bike trails. And I ride a lot of the GRG trails all the time, Madison County trails, the St. Clair County trails. So I agree, GRG could be a great partner in terms of sharing resources, and that's something that our company's worked a little bit with GRG as well. So that's not a bad suggestion at all. Regarding the bike trail funding, that's really above my head in terms of how we would make sure that we would secure funding for that particular piece of the project. I can tell you that it is important to the county and the transit district. So every attempt will be made to build that portion of the project. There were a couple of questions regarding the light rail being moved away kind of from the right of the front door of the Mid-America Airport out a little bit away from the front door. That was actually requested by the airport itself, Brian Johnson in particular, the new airport director, who's done a great job out there. The original alignment had Metrolink literally running right up to the front door of the airport facility and the terminal there. And Brian's experience on a national level is that actually can handcuff the development of the actual airport itself. And so he brought that idea to the table. It was actually not a cost savings idea, but it was more looking at the bigger picture of what's going on out at the airport, future plans for the airport, making sure we don't handcuff them with this project. So that was the reason for moving the alignment out there a few hundred feet away from the door. And of course, the airport will have to build walkways and things of that nature, right? So we can get the users and the riders into the airport. So I think that covered my questions. Kim, did I miss any others?
No, I think you're good for now. I think there'll probably be a lot more questions. And just a little plug for the Metro Bike Link with all our work with St. Clair County Transit District. It is an amazing asset in this region that not a lot of people know about, and it's easily accessible. You can jump on the Metrolink with your bikes on the Missouri side, quickly cross over, and you have access to this amazing trail system that runs along Metrolink, and really it's both urban and rural in areas, and it's really a great opportunity to check it out. So
absolutely.
Next question, there is a question about how much of the economic development sales tax has actually been collected to date, Scott, for this north side, south side. What is the balance in the pot of the EcoDevo tax with regards to this project that you're talking about?
Right, so that tax went into effect in the fall of 2017, and the transit portion has been accumulating since then, and we currently have in the mid 40s. I don't have an exact update, but let's say ballpark about $42 to $45 million that we've been banking for that future project. And the first couple of years, it was running about 12 million a year. The city, since the pandemic began, is down in sales tax revenue by about 20% overall. So I think in 2020, we'll probably be closer to 10 million in transit revenue from that sales tax.
Okay, so there's another question for you as well, Scott. So will the recent and continuing changes to Natural Bridge with the resurfacing and safety project impact improved transit? And will it be a hindrance to incorporating either light rail or BRT?
Great question. So the Natural Bridge project is a MoDOT safety project that focused on a very dangerous roadway corridor on Natural Bridge for both drivers and pedestrians. Probably not everybody has seen it. They constructed some large center medians and roundabouts and other pedestrian and driver safety improvements. The safety aspects of that project, I think we're about $3.5 million. When we're talking about And that's over a few miles. We're talking about light rail. We're talking about over $100 million a mile. We're talking about gold standard BRT. We're probably at least $20 million a mile. And so for both of those projects, they're really almost full corridor rebuilds. So in some regards, it doesn't matter too much what is there when we get to the transit project, as long as we have adequate right-of-way. But I will say for the Natural Bridge project, it's already created a much safer corridor for all users. And we've established that now as a roadway that has one travel lane in each direction. And so we've kind of set the precedent for lane reduction through the transit corridor. And the size of those median islands is more than sufficient to go back and rebuild a transit, either bus rapid transit or light rail running way through those medians. But it'll be substantially reconstructed in any case.
And one follow-up question, talking about Natural Bridge in this study, one of the questions is, so what will this study look like with regards to stakeholder input? So will there be input from St. Louis County, because we are talking about regional infrastructure and the potential expansion of the cross-county outside the city boundary? So will there be county input? How will this work with the former East-West Gateway study? And then finally, who makes the final decision on what mode is chosen in the north side, south side corridor?
Great, all good questions. Yes, so everything in this study is really, I think, building on the 2018 study. That's the basis for this analysis. The opportunity for participation from St. Louis County is absolutely there. So Bi-State, of course, is a regional entity, and they're going to be co-leading the study with us. We would welcome participation on a steering committee from representatives from St. Louis County. We're following the already established long-range corridor. So we're not reinventing the wheel in terms of the route. We're just assessing mode within that route. And so St. Louis County has participated in those past corridor studies, which we're not deviating from. And then in terms of, who makes the final decision, I think the person in the driver's seat for that will be the mayor of St. Louis, but this has to be a project that is adopted by East-West Gateway into the Transportation Improvement Program. It's got to be a project that Bi-State believes in and is ready to operate. And those are all regional decisions. So I think, given that it's a sales tax passed in the city, we want to, move ahead with it, but certainly the final decisions are going to be essentially regional decisions, because you can't do it without Bi-State and without East-West Gateway approval.
Thank you. So the next question, Jean Ponzi is with us today, and she has put her question in the chat box and in the question box. So she is desperate to get this question out there. But Jessica, I think this one is directed at you. Learning from GRG's process in negotiating maintenance and operational agreements with municipalities, based on Jessica's statement that Metro uses station facilities, but they are on municipality-owned property. If appropriate, would Metro like to comment on the state of interaction with GRG, or how that partnership is working, if there is one?
Sure. Yeah. So Bi-State Development and Great Rivers Greenway are close working partners. The current Brickline project, we have a number of representatives from our agency who are giving input and working closely with planners and reviewing plans, because it's a long Metrolink alignment part of it. So absolutely. And then of course the Cortex station, along with basically all the entities that are here today, there was close partnership. I think it's a great comment and testament to GRG's expertise in those kinds of sort of land use arrangements, and there's always something to be learned. So yes, we partner with GRG closely on trail projects and making sure we're coordinating with multimodal connections. And I think working with their planners and learning from how they go about the sort of smaller scale land use arrangements is a great comment and suggestion.
Thank you. So Jim, from the MPO perspective, what is going to be necessary to move any project forward for our current system in the St. Louis region? And a little add on to that, Pat, is you talked about the 96 million allocated for the light rail expansion project in Illinois. When Jim finishes, is that all you're going to need for that project, or is there more funding that will need to be found to complete that project?
I'd like to hear if they need more money now before I say it.
Yeah, we always need more money, Jim. We always need more money, just like everyone else. Yeah, look, at the end of the day, there's a potential that we'll need additional funding for the project, right? And so we're at the 10% design stage. I think at the 30% design stage, we'll have a much better handle on that as you get into more of the project specifics. So that will be a challenge that the county and the transit district will have to come up with, but the project is going to move forward. So
thank you. Okay, Jim, you can now answer.
Oh, that gave me time to think of an answer for that. I think the big thing is going to be creativity and cooperation. I think we need to think outside of the lines or the boxes that we normally work in, or silos in this case, I guess. We look at just using FTA money often on some of these projects. And we have in the past, stretched that out to use things like CMAQ funding or STP funding and commit some of those things to some of these projects. So if we sit back, think a little more creatively, and don't just say, well, we can only use build funds or we can only use New Start funding, I think that'll help us go a long way. We also will probably need to be setting some priorities and be willing to share with one another a little more than what we have in the past. And that's tough to say coming off of a pandemic and coming off a time when a lot of communities don't have, or coming into a time when a lot of communities don't have funding that they need to do the basic things like resurfacing roads and repairing bridges. But transit is just as an important piece of the transportation system as the roads and the bridges are. So we just need to think about that a little more. Kind of in the same vein, going back to the question that Pat was asked earlier about the Metro Bike Link, in the past, to fund that bikeway, St. Clair County Transit District had requested CMAQ funding, congestion mitigation, air quality improvement funding, and I think even used some active transportation funding. It used to be called transportation enhancement funds. So, if we start to think outside of the box, break down those silos and start blending that money a little bit more, we're able to do a lot more as a region.
And just quick on that, and you might not have the answer, but what do we need to entice the private sector to see the value in our public transportation systems, similar to potentially what we saw for the Cortex station? Yeah. What do we need to be doing to entice them to the table as well?
Yeah, so there's no silver bullet, obviously. And this is just my opinion. I don't know that I know the answer, but the big thing is value proposition. What's in it for them? What are they going to get out of it? How are they moving their employees to work from home or to places? How are they going to be able to increase their business and their revenues as a result of, doing, enhanced bus stops or doing a new light rail system or a extension into North City or, even out to the airport? So what's in it for them? How are they going to be able to benefit, financially, but then also quality of life benefit for their employees? And, often I've heard the reason companies don't want to come to the St. Louis region is the transit system. Some people think, or they're comparing it to like a New York or a Chicago. It doesn't get you to enough places, or there's, we're not, it's not serving enough people. And so, I think the more emphasis we put to the transit system, the better off we're going to be from an economic development standpoint, and in terms of presenting what the value proposition is to private companies.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to hop in there just quickly on the private sector question. Sorry if that's okay. Just a project that we have cooking and that is slated for implementation in calendar year 21 is overhauling our fare collection system and fare policy. And so we've long talked to employers who are interested in more of a partnership and an arrangement with incentivizing, perhaps with discounts that they're able to provide to their workforce. But the distribution mechanism of our paper pass system has been kind of a barrier to really going forward. And so when you think about, the innovation district that's developing in downtown St. Louis, just north of where you are, Kim, I think there's a lot to be said for making it easier. And you're right, Jim, sort of like demonstrating the value, but one of the barriers that we see for our current customers and what we hear from former and hopefully future customers is make it easier for us to access and pay for the system. And so overhauling to electronic faring and more variety of options that you can kind of put in the hands of employers and have them sort of advocate for it amongst their workforce, I think will help make that connection stronger too.
Thank you, Jessica. I think that this is a really important question, especially as the region looks at this new 2030 jobs plan. We have to have access for people to get to these jobs. And so how do we meet in the middle with the private sector? And I think that that's going to be a constant conversation moving forward. So there's a question that's in our question box this morning about, and we all know this, how does the number of parking lots in St. Louis inhibit public mass transit ridership? We have a lot of parking lots in St. Louis, and what can we be done more to encourage ridership on our system? Anyone want to take that?
Can I
Sure,
start?
oh, okay, go ahead,
Go
Scott.
ahead, Jessica.
Well, sorry, this is just with thinking of the innovation district. SLDC, the St. Louis Development Corporation, is in the process of a downtown parking study. And so just that area in particular, there's a lot of surface lots and there's a lot of potential for redevelopment. So I think it's a matter of pairing that really deep assessment of your parking capacity and what you actually are going to anticipate needing, and then promoting and making more accessible and user-friendly the system as we have it, because high capacity transit is, at many people's doorway. So what is, we don't have high parking prices. We don't have high congestion in our region. We've got, a lot of single occupancy vehicles in our region. So the normal things that might push a person in an urban area to use transit might not be there to help give the nudge. But certainly that's a great question, Mr. Bryson. And I think that downtown St. Louis parking study is going to be really telling in moving that conversation forward. Scott?
Yeah, I'll just say that the beauty of the north side, south side route is that a lot of it runs through densely populated neighborhoods. And the key to successful transit is connecting relatively dense residential areas with relatively dense employment areas as quickly as possible. And so that's why we think that route is so important, because it connects people who need transit to the bigger transit system and directly to employment centers. And as we get closer to building that project, I think integrating land use planning along the corridor so that we have, let's say, lower parking minimums, and we have deterrents to building, new surface parking lots, within a half mile of the corridor, will help really reinforce residential density and make riding that corridor more appealing, and that that will support better service when you have ridership. So the that theme of prioritizing transit over prioritizing a single occupancy vehicle will become very important in planning efforts through the north side, south side corridor.
Thank you. So there's a question, and we're hearing a lot of this as we, hopefully we'll start to come out of this pandemic about how many people will return to work and what will the work world look like coming out of this pandemic. But the question is, what are other alternatives are planners and advocates considering or advocating for in a way of innovative, more cost-effective, user-driven public transportation options? Mobility on demand, ride sharing, on-demand vans, autonomous vehicles. We are seeing some micro transit in the St. Louis region. Jessica, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about our pilots. And so, Kim and CMT, you guys have long had good partnerships with Enterprise, and the guaranteed ride home is just that. It's kind of that last mile connection, that extension of the fixed route network outside of service or geography. But what we're looking at, and we have a department now dedicated to alternative mobility, innovative services here. And so in St. Louis County, we have 2 areas where we're piloting microtransit contracted service. So 6 passenger vans. It's basically a wrapped branded Chrysler Pacifica. And, so it's meant to provide point-to-point service within fixed zones that can be summoned in real time, either through your phone's app or through a phone call if you don't have a smartphone. So, these platforms and technologies are out there. We are in the middle of our first pilot year testing one of them. And the idea is, does it provide a better service profile for the demand that's there? So in a more diffuse area of our service area, where you don't have like the residential density, but folks still want access to transit to get to the pharmacy or to connect to their nearest transit hub or Metrolink station. How can we do that in the most efficient way possible? So there's certainly a lot of emerging technologies out there, and we are dipping our toe and testing what might work and in which parts of our service area.
And I'd like to add that they're doing the same thing in the Illinois side of the river as well. So
That's right.
You have a micro transit pilot going on in East St. Louis, as well as Lebanon and Mascoutah. And part of this, they're looking at operational costs too, in the demand for the service in those areas. So there is a lot of that testing going on, and I think it's exciting to see these new type of connections to transit in St. Louis. Okay, so we have time for about one more question, and then we're going to ask the panelists to answer one final question that we have put together. But the question we have is, can enhanced bus infrastructure treatment actions like signal prioritization or dedicated lanes to support redesigned frequent bus networks be pursued in the short term, separate from a BRT study, or is a regional level enhanced bus study needed?
Sean, good question. Yeah, so I think that building from the rapid connector studies that wrapped in 2017 and looked at 2 corridors across on the Missouri side of the service area is certainly a good place to start. And we've been talking about signal prioritization for a while. So I think it would warrant like a broader look. Places like there's Boston suburbs that are implementing dedicated bus lanes in a really inspiring way right now. And I think can make that transit network be even more useful. But I believe, and Jim, maybe correct me if I believe this would probably warrant like a bigger regional look at which arterials we'd want to start with, knowing kind of the state we're in today.
Kim, are you looking at me to respond to that or what? Yeah, I think a larger regional look on that would be good. We've invested a lot of money in signal infrastructure in some of the counties and in the city. And so, something like that would mesh nicely with the work that's there, but we obviously would need to study that and think about it a little more rather than just jumping into it. So.
Thank you. So one kind of combo question for our panelists today, and I want to thank them for all their time, but what is the key takeaway from each of you to our audience on the future of transit in the region, and how can individuals, companies, and stakeholders impact these decisions moving forward? So maybe we'll start with Pat and we'll go through the order of presentations if that works. So Pat, you're first up.
Sure, thanks. Thank you. So listen, I think it is, as Jim mentioned previously, we need to get private businesses, in my mind, more actively engaged in seeing the benefit of the transit system. And in my mind, for our particular project, we're going to see that as we develop that particular area and that property out near the airport. Without the private investments out there, I think it makes it a real challenge, right? And so in my mind, I think engaging and demonstrating the value to some of these private businesses is really important from my point of view.
Thank you. Scott?
I'm going to say the missing link is state funding, because both City of St. Louis and St. Louis County, we've passed multiple local tax increases to fund the system we have. And we've paid, for instance, the cross-county expansion, we paid for largely locally. So we've been able to make strides without the support of the state, which just puts us at a huge disadvantage compared to some other places. Washington, Texas, Minnesota, different states with different profiles that have nonetheless made consistent commitments to construct transit in their cities. And so I think without state support, we're always going to be kind of behind the 8 ball, because the state, they just bring to the table many more resources potentially than local communities can pull together on their own. So that's number one. I think number two is just, the ongoing commitment to kind of move the ball down the field each year to get these projects done, and the continuing focus on what our priorities are. There've been a lot of potential projects kind of put up on the board in the St. Louis region in the last decade, and we haven't really coalesced for the most part about what really the top priority was. And so having that kind of singular focus on, this is the most important project and here's the steps we're going to take every year to get closer to realizing it, I think would go a long way towards improving our outcomes.
Thank you. Jessica?
Sure. Well, building on the first two comments, I guess I would just want to emphasize to any stakeholder from whatever sector listening that the main point that I was trying to make earlier, which is that transit is essential, and that even amidst this pandemic, when we are asked to stay at home, you saw that we were still carrying millions of boardings throughout the last year. 50% of our riders needed it to get where they needed to go. And so when you think about it from the employer perspective, private perspective, it's a critical part of recruitment and retention for a lot of these essential business types. And that is a theme that has emerged that we are wanting to make sure we emphasize. We have unbelievably dedicated professionals on our staff. It takes a tremendous amount of resources to reliably operate and maintain in a state of good repair the system that we've got. So to get to talk about and plan for these long-range expansion projects is just such a delight, because these are all things that will enhance what we're already doing well and putting so much into. But yes, I think just knowing that transit is essential to a region, and to to Scott's point, making sure that we're focused on goals that enhance equity and access for everybody. I think that kind of is something for everybody to coalesce around. And none of this gets done without regional support. So it is a lot of pressure on the groups here to make sure that we are moving forward. But I like that thought of moving the ball forward and just everybody rowing in the same direction together. I think that's critical.
Thank you, Jessica. Jim?
It's a real novel concept, Jessica. Yeah, all rowing in the same direction. It's at least it's novel for us, I think. So I agree. I think we need to look at probably three things. You know, creativity, thinking outside the box in terms of how we're funding these things and what we want to do and need to do as a region in terms of building our transit system. Cooperation, you know, going to, you know, the idea of all of us rowing in the same direction, you know, all boats rise. I don't know what other nautical themes I need to use to try to encourage this, that we are all on the same page. And then, you know, completing it, right? Working towards something, getting a list of things like Scott had mentioned, and know that it's a regional goal and we're going to work toward that until we finish it. And then we'll move on to the next thing and finish that. You know, those things can be done concurrently, but we shouldn't let one slow down the other if it's if we already have a you know, kind of a priority set. And in terms of the mobility and equity, you know, we're getting ready to update our long range plan. It's due in a couple of years, and Marcy Meistrick from my staff is going to be spearheading that. And one of the things she's wanting to look at, and I think it's a great thing, is mobility and accessibility of the system, not just roads and sidewalks, but transit, right? How can we move people from point A to point B? How can we make it easy for them to get there? How do we make it available to everyone? So, you know, my takeaway is creativity, cooperation, completion, and then working towards a mobility and accessibility improvements in the regions. So.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We have had a couple comments in our chat box today that are directed towards security of the system. And we would be remiss if we didn't introduce the Metro Transit GM of Field Security, Kevin Scott. And Kevin was going to take a moment to say a few words about transit security before we wrap up today. And I know that we're over time, but I do think that these are really important conversations we're having this morning. So I hope that you can all stay with us till the end. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me. I do want to just kind of give you a brief overview. Certainly we were in the news since Sunday with this tragic occurrence on the system with this young security guard. I want to walk you through a very dynamic process in about 2.5 minutes. Since 2018, Bi-State has been involved with a very specific and detailed security analysis of the public safety structure on the Metro Transit system. Prior to 2018, prior to this assessment beginning, there was an inheritance of a very degraded overall public safety component. There was very skewed lines of responsibility. There was no comprehensive approach. There was no best practices involved. And so that exercise that they began in 2018 with the security consultants was paramount to moving the system in the right direction, okay? For the last 13 or 14 months since we've been here, we've continued to work with WSP, we've continued to work with our stakeholders. And if you take a look at the 6 primary categories that the analysis focuses on, and the 99 overall recommendations, there's been huge improvement. And when I say huge improvement, from a comprehensive perspective, from how we deploy our security resources on the system, to how we train, to how we, to our emergency management structure, to our use of environmental design and infrastructure, all of these things are being built, okay? From a field security perspective, we have built a 3-tiered layer approach, and our law enforcement partnerships are key. And we cannot have a transit authority, a one organizational transit authority, So our efforts are a one-team transit authority built in the totality of a collaborative that over the last 13 or 14 months has been corrected and has been deployed seamlessly. So there are a lot of great things going on. We've focused on more security, visibility, security, and fluidity on the system. We're not providing protection to the system as we would if we were providing protection to a fixed asset such as a bank. And we're seeing results in these dynamics on our monthly numbers as they come in. Now, certainly COVID has impacted ridership, but we are moving in the right direction. This incident on Sunday was an unprovocated, absolute attack that could have never been anticipated. And there are a number of things that played into it once the investigation played out. And I certainly am not in the position to go into, but where we are now and where we started from when the company initiated the process in 2018, which also included an external peer review of our public safety structure, we're leaps and bounds ahead of where I thought we would be at this point. Every day we work to make the system safer. We operate in a dynamic environment, as most transit systems do across the country. We will always face challenges, but we always will have to adapt to address those challenges. So what I want to do this morning is I just want to, before we leave, I just want to put things in perspective. In 2019, Metrolink, and this is the Metrolink system, had 13 million riders. Throughout the course of 2020, during COVID, we had 6.7 million riders. We were down 48%. But even with 6.7 million riders, we only handled 66 Part 1 offenses. That is, these are UCR crime offenses. And these are straight from our law enforcement partners, St. Louis County, the City Metropolitan Police, and the St. Clair County Sheriff's Department. We only handled 66 Part 1 offenses, or experienced 66 Part 1 offenses, and only 424 Part 2 offenses, which are far less serious. That's a total of 490 total offenses out of 6.7 million riders. That is far less than 1%. So we are making an impact with this plan. The plan that was presented through this analysis is a solid plan, but it takes a collaborative, and we will continue to work every single day to make the system safer minute by minute. But the one thing that I can never guarantee you, I will never be able to do it. Never will any police chief be able to do it. We will never be able to guarantee that we will not have challenges. And that's it. But we are focused. We are regionally focused. We understand the importance of this asset. We are pro St. Louis. We are pro region. And we want to sell this I think, a system that has really been hampered by a lot of perception problems as well, back to the region. And Sunday was a setback for this perception. And it certainly is something that is devastating to our staff. We have to continue to move forward with the plans that everybody agreed to and that were put in place, because in the long run, we will have success. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm very passionate about this, and I would be more than happy to meet one-on-one with any of you that wanted to sit down and talk about that assessment, what those 99 recommendations entailed, what we're doing from a personnel standpoint, from a multi-jurisdictional collaborative standpoint, from the enhancements of overall technology and a force multiplication standpoint to infrastructure. There are a lot of exciting things going on, and we have to continue to forge forward and implement these strategies. So I appreciate the time, Kim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin, for that update. And again, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and all of the questions and comments that we received in our chat boxes. We do want to let you know that we will be posting this video. It has been recorded to our social channels later this morning for anyone who is interested in rewatching or sharing it with your colleagues. I think that this is really important information that we discussed today, and this conversation needs to continue. Please look for additional information about our upcoming events on cmt-stl.org. We have a design workshop next week. We're actually starting our second transformation project at the Emerson Park Station in East St. Louis. It is a virtual design workshop, so you can join us from anywhere in the region, and it'll be at 6 o'clock. There's information on that. We also will have some information on our website about our Crushing on Transit event. People in St. Louis do love their transit, and so if you're interested in giving a video testimony or you want to hear from others, please check that out on the website. We know that the days and weeks ahead are going to be defined by more changes and new challenges. We've talked about some of those today, but we do know, and Jessica hit on it as well, that transit service is essential to the St. Louis region now more than ever, and especially as St. Louisans get back to the business of building safe, sustainable, and economically viable communities. So we have got to continue to talk about the value of public transit to our transportation systems. And if you'd like to join us in that and you're not a member, please consider joining Citizens for Modern Transit. You can go to our website as well for that information. Thank you, and make it a great day and stay safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much.